The request for the most secret dream was sincerely uttered under the arches of the magic temple. The girl dreamed that her own husband would love only her. The lone figure of a prostrate girl stood before the magical statue. The supplicant begged that this would happen even after death. Renya Lepore sobbed. This was the wish she had made. She folded her hands in prayer. She looked at the sculpture with tears in her eyes. The young lady had a very good reason to make such a wish. The girl approached the statue. Crying, she hugged the stone pedestal with her hands. Her father, Coriolano, hid his pain from losing his wife at an early age behind his desire to become rich. The man tried to do everything possible to ensure that he managed to accumulate a huge fortune. But his main dream was high status. And most of all, her father's gaze was riveted on one heir of a ruined aristocratic family. The man looked at the slender blonde with admiration. The young lord allowed him to be called Edwin Lepore. He extended his hand to his future relative. Just as Edwin wanted to improve his family's position, the girl's father wanted to gain status through her marriage. Thus, Renia became a noble lady. At the wedding, her father cried. The man confessed that he would finally be able to find peace. The young lady did not want a noble family name. The wedding ceremony took place in a Catholic church, where they were pronounced husband and wife. The girl looked at her fiancé with love and tenderness. She sincerely desired his heart. The newlywed husband leaned over Renya. He confessed to his bride that his heart belonged only to her, until the end of their days. The girl was delighted. The brunette felt the coldness that emanated from Edwin. The husband could not accept the way his wife's father managed the money. Over time, the blonde's discontent began to spread to his young wife. 3 years later, the stone walls of the huge mansion were striking in their architecture. A promise was made to do everything possible to take care of someone. Renya peered into the room cautiously and froze in shock, her mouth hanging open. Her husband was telling another woman that his heart belonged to her forever. Lady Lepore watched from the side as her husband gazed intently into the eyes of the red-haired Freya with tenderness on his face. Renya's father sent a new maid to serve them so that she could pay off his debts, and the girl immediately won Edwin's heart. The lady was in despair. She tried not to scream from insult. Freya easily achieved what the brunette had failed to achieve in 3 years with incredible efforts. Quiet, stealthy footsteps echoed through the tense silence of the room. Lady Lepore tiptoed into the empty room. The brunette mentally apologized to the maid. The deceived wife came into the room to throw the earring. She dreamed that the homewrecker would pack her things. Suddenly, the young lady's gaze fell on the maid's bag, which stood on the dressing table. The brunette's gaze was drawn to a scarlet stone at the bottom of the bag, and some ancient piece of paper rolled into a roll. The girl carefully pulled the scroll out of the bag. Renya unfolded an ancient map indicating the location of the wish-granting statue. All she had to do was hand over the stone and receive her wish. The brunette was shocked by her rival's insidious plans. This couldn't be. Did Freya really want to win her husband's heart? Renya wondered if Edwin would truly love her if she made a wish. In her dreams, the brunette had already heard her husband confess that she was his only love. She imagined a sobbing, red-haired rival. Our heroine decided that it couldn't get any worse. She encouraged herself with enthusiasm. She decided that she absolutely had to go to the statue that granted wishes. In the present tense, the statue's booming voice clarified her wish. Summarized, she wanted her husband to always love only her, even after death. Suddenly, the sculpture came to life and waved its hand casually. It said that the brunette's wish had been fulfilled. It was time for her to leave. Renia didn't immediately believe it. The girl kept bowing low. Her voice trembled with sincere gratitude. Words of gratitude to Mr. Statue kept escaping from her lips. Renya left the temple in a rapturous mood. The girl was glad that her cherished dream had come true. The magical statue was watching the visitor. The brunette felt incredible joy that everything happened the way she wanted. At that time, the young lady did not yet know that her family happiness would not last long. A piercing scream tore through the night silence, echoing off the dark walls of the mansion. The majestic mansion had witnessed a tragedy. The servants were sobbing and wiping their faces with handkerchiefs. They explained to Renya that her husband had suddenly fainted and stopped breathing. The brunette screamed. She called her husband by name. Tears were pouring from the eyes of the young lady. She thought that her husband was really dead because she made that stupid wish. Hot drops flowed down the face of the grieving girl and fell on the lifeless face of Lord Edwin. And then a miracle happened. The blonde shuddered. He opened his eyes, and in a hoarse voice he said his wife's name. The girl was in shock. Her dead husband had come back to life. The maid and the butler were trembling with fear. They watched silently. Renya stepped back from the rebel. The blonde man sat up with a smile. The young man was not a living, breathing person. Renya was sobbing and trying to run away. Her husband was trying to catch up with her. The deceased was perplexed why his wife rejected his love. He tried to catch up with the brunette with a bouquet of flowers. Renya hiccuped with fear. The Lord was like a living corpse. The blonde handed his wife a bouquet as she ran away. He asked her to accept the flowers. The brunette tried to run away as fast as she could. She screamed at Edwin that he smelled like carrion. From that moment on, the deceased only swore his love for his wife, and with each passing day, he decomposed more and more. He explained that he smelled like dead flesh because he was dead. The girl was crying all the time. One night, Renya threw earth into the grave where her late husband was. The blonde reminded her that he had sworn to love her even after death. The living dead man covered himself with his hands from the clods of earth flying at him. He asked why the girl rejected him. He asked her to stop. The brunette admitted that she was very sorry, but she couldn't do otherwise. The young lady continued throwing clods of earth into the grave. Renya didn't stop what she was doing. She was burying the blonde. She said that her thoughts didn't matter. She believed that the dead should lie in the ground. Edwin covered himself with his hands from the clods of earth flying at him. He looked at his wife. He said that he had figured out the reason why she rejected his feelings. Dead meant that he was dead and his wife was not. These words made the girl break out in a cold sweat. She stared at her dead husband in fear. The blonde stretched his hands out of the grave to the girl. He said that he knew a way for them to be together forever. The dead man grabbed the brown-haired woman by the leg and pulled her towards his grave. The girl resisted and screamed at her husband, trying to stop him. The young lady kicked and tried to throw the dead man's hand off her leg, but the deceased held her very tightly and was not going to let go of his prey. The blonde threw her to the bottom of the grave. He noticed that he could not be alive again, but that did not mean that his wife could not join him in death. The man held Renya's arms tightly at her sides, calmed her down, told his dear wife not to be afraid. Renya begged her husband to let her go. The brunette lay in panic at the bottom of the grave, shaking with fear. Tears were pouring from her eyes. Her dead husband confessed his feelings. The dead man confessed his love to his sweet Renya even after his death. A loud, desperate cry of horror echoed across the deserted cemetery. Blood splattered in all directions and stained the ground at the bottom of the grave. That was how Renya died. The girl's soul reasoned that she should not have worried about Edwin and Freya's affair. She should have wished for something more reasonable. With belated regret, Renya thought that perhaps she should have been better. Suddenly, the brunette was again transported to the moment when she was kneeling in front of the magic statue, and the sculpture was asking about her wish. The girl looked around in surprise. Everything was repeating itself with incredible precision. Renya was in that place again and saw the magical statue. The sculpture was again before her eyes. Renya was surprised that she was able to return to this temple again. The statue asked if the girl was not here to make a wish. The brunette was glad that such a question. She even began to stutter a little, speaking about her desire. She did not understand what kind of ominous feeling it was. The girl quickly touched herself with her hands. She froze for a moment. She was wearing the same clothes as the first time. Renya thought that this couldn't be. Looking at the sculpture, the brunette realized that she had returned to the day when she made her first wish. To check whether it was reality or a dream, the girl pinched her cheek. She pulled the skin a little and let it go abruptly. Lady Laporte screamed loudly in pain. Her cheek immediately swelled and turned red. The young lady realized that she really had not slept. The frozen sculpture's face showed no emotion, but it did ask a question. The monument was wondering if the girl would make a wish. The brunette screamed. Exactly. She remembered her desire. How could she forget about it? According to the information on the card, there were several rules that had to be followed when making wishes. Rule number 1. You had to make a wish before the sand in the hourglass ran out. Rule number 2. You were only allowed to make one wish. Rule number 3. Once a wish was made, it could neither be changed nor cancelled. Anyone who tried to break the rules could instantly lose their limbs. They would be torn from their body, and the person himself would turn into a statue. Cold sweat ran down the girl's face. Her whole body shuddered in horror. The brunette did not want to become a statue. Renya thought about it. The sand in the hourglass was already half full. The girl began to formulate her wish anew. She wished to be rich. The statue mentioned that the girl had already wished earlier. The sculpture recalled the beginning of her wish. The brunette wanted her husband. Renia suddenly fell silent. She was speechless from surprise. Stuttering, the brunette asked what they were talking about. She was at a loss as to what to do. She remembered the wish that her husband would love only her, even after death. Had she really said half of the wish already? The magic statue confirmed it. Renia froze in place. The girl was in despair. How she wished she could return to the moment when she had not yet managed to make the first half of her wish. The brunette fell to her knees again and grabbed her head with her hands. The magic statue hurried the girl. Everything had to be done faster. The young lady looked at the hourglass. The sand was falling with a quiet rustling sound. She was almost out of time. She decided that she had enough of fooling around. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she would like her husband. At this point she stopped. She didn't know if she wanted her husband to love her. She thought it was too similar to her first wish. She thought about whether she should wish for her husband to be happy. She immediately realized that she would never make such a wish. She decided that it was as bad as his death last time. The girl did not want this cheater to be happy. Moreover, such a desire could lead to Freya taking her place, and the brunette herself could disappear. The girl was thinking about what wish to make so that Edwin would not die and she would receive benefits. Maybe she should have wished for her husband to be rich. No. She decided that it might lead to her and her father dying and Edwin inheriting their fortune. She imagined her husband crying at her and her father's graves, and swearing to take care of the huge treasuries he inherited after their death. Renia couldn't let her father die. Otherwise, her unfaithful husband could get their fortune. She didn't know what to say. Time was running out. The brunette couldn't make up her mind. She wanted her husband. She couldn't continue with these words. She understood that if she didn't make a wish now, she would die again. There was almost no sand left in the hourglass. Her time was almost up. The girl said that she wished her husband was... At the last moment, the brunette shouted that she wanted the magic statue to become her husband. The last grain of sand fell into the bottom of the clock. Time stopped. The daring desire dissolved into the air, leaving behind an oppressive silence. A magical statue in the form of a muscular young man asked the girl to repeat her wish. Renia, overwhelmed with emotion, no longer understood what was happening. She had had enough. The girl shouted that she wanted him to be her husband. The brunette sat down on the floor. She knew she was about to start crying. She thought about how she had ruined her past life, and now she had ruined her second chance. Suddenly the sculpture turned to Renia. The monument asked if this was really her true wish. If this was really so, then the magic statue was willing to be her husband. Renia was shocked. She wondered why she needed another husband. Monument noticed that the girl did not look happy, although her wish had come true. The brunette feigned joy. In all likelihood, she was still in shock. She said she was very happy. She thanked him for becoming her husband. She thought about it. It seemed she had two husbands now. One cheated on her with her maid. The other was a statue that granted wishes. She noted with irony that it was not even worth thinking about the fact that one could feel unhappy. Suddenly, there was a loud cracking sound. The magical statue began to crumble and collapse. The young man advised the girl to move away. The monument was breaking into pieces. Renia began to carefully step back. She watched as the statue crumbled and fell apart. The brunette did not understand what was happening here. Suddenly, one of the huge pieces fell next to the girl. At the last moment, she managed to avoid injury. A moment later, a naked young man stood in front of the girl. The brunette tried to understand what was happening here. She stared at the naked guy. Her eyes widened in surprise. The girl wondered if the magical statue had simply turned into a human. The guy rubbed his bare shoulder. He asked Renia why she was so surprised. The girl stared at the young man in admiration. The young man admitted that he could not be her husband and her article at the same time. The brunette tried to walk carefully on the floor with his bare feet. The brunette slightly inclined his head to the shoulder and said his name. The young man's name was Beldemer. The living statue appeared in all its naked glory. The brunette said that he was ready to be her husband. Renia did not take her admiring gaze off the man. The naked guy who had just been a statue stood before our heroine. The brunette bowed and said that he agreed to be Renia's husband. The brunette was delighted. If Renia understood correctly, the statue had shed its stone skin and underneath was a living and incredibly beautiful man. The girl could not contain her delighted emotions. Moreover, she understood that this handsome man with an unrealistically perfect body became her husband. Renia was puzzled. Could this really be happening? She looked down from Beldemer's face and blushed. The guy was completely naked. He had nothing on. The girl gasped in surprise. Renya turned away abruptly. Her whole face was flushed with embarrassment. The brunette asked his interlocutor what was wrong. The brunette didn't look at the revived guy. Lady Lepore impolitely pointed her finger at him. She emphasized that the young man was naked. The young man chuckled in surprise. Suddenly, his strong hand pulled Renya closer to him by the waist. He told the girl that she should not take her eyes off him. The young woman wanted to cover her eyes with her hands. She was embarrassed by what was happening. The brunette reminded her that she was now his wife. He said that she had the opportunity to admire him as much as her heart desired. The brunette looked at the young man as if enchanted. Her gaze showed admiration. She wondered if the guy was rushing things too much. Renya gave her cloak to the brunette. The young man tied it around his waist like a loincloth. The young lady thought she had ruined another life. Everything would have been simpler if Beldemer had remained a statue. The brunette asked the guy a question. She asked if he would really be her husband. Renya thought about what might happen if the brunette found out that she had already been married. The handsome man was thinking at that moment about how many people desired him. He remembered how someone secretly snuck into his room to spend the night with him. They tried to seduce the brunette, and others pointed a knife at him. Some just wanted his face. The young man was trying to escape violence. The brunette thought it was very tiring. Renya was quietly watching the guy and his memories. She thought about what might happen if such a narcissist found out that she already had a husband. The girl was sure that this would be a severe blow to his ego. She cut herself off abruptly. So he wasn't always a statue. Maybe he did something bad and was punished. Either way, it was an unpleasant feeling. The guy was amazed. He admitted that no one wanted to possess him as much as Renia did. The brunette was embarrassed. She asked if it was really a compliment towards her. Given how their acquaintance had turned out, the brunette had promised to be a model husband. There was no chance that he, Beldemer, would be anything less than perfect. Renya was shocked by his confession. She clapped her hands. She didn't understand whether she should be grateful to him for this. Despite the brunette's promise, he warned that the girl was not allowed to touch him. Renya was taken aback. It turned out that she could look. Touch, no. She thought about it. It became interesting. She had a husband who she couldn't touch. Renya realized that this made him even more desirable. The brunette folded his arms across his chest. He asked why the girl looked so disappointed. Renya denied it. She replied that she would keep the recommendations in mind. A naked young man walked next to Renya. They were moving through the night forest. The guy asked where she was leading him. The brunette was embarrassed. She stopped. She thought for a while. She spent some time choosing her words. She didn't know how to answer this question. Renya turned to her interlocutor. The skirts of her voluminous dress flew up and fell at her feet. The girl said that she knew of an empty house nearby. They were heading there. It was an estate belonging to the guild. The building was newly built and in a great location, but there was one problem. It had been empty since rumors began to circulate of ghosts wandering its halls. The building had been empty for approximately 3 years. The young people soon found themselves inside the estate. Brunei did not understand why they could not go to Renya's house or her residence. The brunette justified herself by saying that the guild provided her with housing. The girl was sure that the young man would find it uncomfortable. The guy chuckled. He asked if the girl really worked in the guild. The brunette laughed nervously. She noted that it could have been said that way. She thought the guy was exhausted. She suggested that they take a rest and postpone the cleaning until tomorrow. She promised to return soon with clothes for him. The brunette approved of the idea. Renya left the room. In the hallway, she thought. She remembered that she hadn't told the guy about the ghost. The girl walked quickly down the corridor of the empty estate. She thought that it made no difference that she had not told about the ghost. Beldemer lay down on the bed. He examined his hand. He thought about how much time had passed since he had so much freedom. Beldemer admired his fingers, enjoyed the frosty air that touched his bare skin. He closed his eyes. He followed the feeling of cold on the tip of his nose, the smell of dust penetrating his lungs. The young man's eyes widened. The memories of dust were unpleasant. Beldemer tensed. The brunette thought that Shapiro did not suspect his return to the human body. The young man lowered his legs to the floor. He thought that he would be late. There was no help to be had. The young man had no choice but to use his beautiful body to restore order here. Beldemer made several passes with his hands. He tried to cast a spell. The young man tried again and again, but nothing worked. The brunette looked closely at his hands from all sides. He was upset that his magic didn't work. The young man thought about it. He remembered how he had been a statue for a long time. Was it really a curse that was to blame for the lack of magic? Suddenly the boy tensed up. He listened. He could hear extraneous sounds from all sides. Someone was giggling in the empty room. Valdemar cautiously peered out of his room into the deserted corridor. Someone was laughing in the spacious hallway too. The brunette thought that something was hanging around in this house. The guy decided that he should check and boldly walk down the corridor. The laughter of an invisible creature floated down the long corridor and bounced off the walls. The ghostly skull left a faintly glowing trail in the darkness. The morning at the Lepore estate began with loud screams. The maid was surprised when she saw how her lady appeared. She noticed that she looked terrible. The girl covered her face with her hands in fear. She asked the owner if she had gotten into a fight. The brunette was coming into the room from the street. Renya wondered why the maid had spoken of a fight. She asked Annie how old she thought her mistress was. The brunette was wearing a dirty dress. The lady asked if her father knew about her absence the night before. The maid replied that he did. After all, the girl had not spent the night at home. Moreover, Miss Freya had disappeared. Since the girl was also not present at the estate, Mr. Edwin decided that his wife was involved in her disappearance. The maid was relieved to admit that the misunderstanding had been cleared up. Someone had said that they had seen Freya leave the estate alone. The maid was interested in where the mistress had been. She hoped that the absence of the mistress had nothing to do with Miss Freya. The brunette hesitated. She was in no hurry to answer. Lady Lepore said yes and no. Annie screamed, noticed that there was no sense in these words, asked if the lady had drunk it. Renya instantly became serious. She wanted the maid to listen to her very carefully, without hysterics. The girl grabbed the maid by the shoulders. The brunette looked into her interlocutor's eyes with insight. She confessed that she had stolen something from Freya yesterday. The maid could not believe it. Renya told the whole truth, and showed her maid an old map. Annie was surprised. She didn't really believe in a statue that could grant wishes. She asked if it really wasn't just an old legend. The lady thought so too at first. But she was wrong. She decided to tell the truth about what happened. At the end of the story, the brunette grabbed her head. They were already here. Annie covered her mouth with her hand. The girl was horrified. Did the mistress really want to say? Renya agreed with the maid's guess. She confirmed that she had a second husband. The maid was shocked. She covered her mouth in horror to keep from screaming, reminded the lady that this was called polyandry. Such things were against the king's laws. Annie was very frightened. The lady knew about it. The maid was worried that if her mistress was caught, she would be sent to prison for 10 years. And the young lady knew about this too. The girl had the chance to start a new life. But now she faced the chance of spending the next 10 years in chains. Renya thought about it. On the other hand, maybe it would be better if she was thrown into some dungeon. She was worried if Valdemar found out about her current marriage. She remembered how the brunette asked if she would do him a favor by allowing him to become her husband. The brunette was horrified. She decided that it was better for her not to think about what he could do to her. Renya paced the room nervously. Suddenly, it seemed she knew how to get out of this situation. The maid asked what the idea was. The young lady seemed to have made the only right decision. The brunette decided that she had to divorce Edwin. This idea seemed brilliant to Renya, and for some time the girl almost danced with joy and pleasure. The maid silently watched her. Annie cautiously noted that she agreed with the lady. It was indeed a terrific idea. Suddenly, she noticed that her mistress had burst into tears. The maid asked where the lady had taken her new husband. The brunette replied that she had left him in the haunted manor. She had come here for Edwin's clothes. Surprise and curiosity were written on the maid's face. The girl asked why the lady needed Mr. Edwin's clothes. The brunette was embarrassed. Renya was hesitant whether to tell the truth or not. She decided to admit that her new husband was completely naked now. The maid was shocked by such a truth. Sometime later, Renya walked quickly down the corridor of the deserted estate where she had left her new husband. In her hands, she held a bundle of clothes. Suddenly, the girl was distracted by some sounds. The brunette froze and looked somewhere up. The girl wondered what it could be. I forced myself to calm down. I told myself that there were no ghosts here. Renya slowly began to climb the creaky stairs. Some otherworldly sounds were heard around the girl. The young lady stood frozen in fear on the stairs. The girl suspected that something was here. She carefully stepped down the wooden steps. Slowly, step by step, Renya began to descend. Yesterday, the girl saw the statue come to life. How could she now say with certainty that there were no ghosts? If there was something here, Beldemer had to be taken away. The girl threw the door open and screamed loudly. She demanded that the evil spirit leave. She insisted that he leave the room. There was no one in the room. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. Everything was as she thought. She calmed herself down, deciding that ghosts did not exist. She didn't finish her sentence as she saw something hanging from the ceiling. The girl screamed in horror. She didn't understand what it was. The transparent skull hung in the air, a bright light pulsing in its eye sockets. It watched the scene intently. In fear, Renya quickly ran out of the room. The girl slammed the heavy doors behind her with force. The brunette was breathing heavily. She didn't understand what she was doing. The girl realized that there really was a ghost living here. Renya decided that she needed to leave this terrible place as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the brunette heard a cough behind her. The girl turned around abruptly. An unfamiliar young man stood in front of her. The girl shouted, asking who he was. She wondered if the blonde was a ghost too. The girl froze in horror, standing near the doors leading to the room where she had recently seen the ghost. The stranger was silent and smiled mysteriously. Renya demanded an answer. She asked the blonde whether he was a man or a ghost. The young man quickly headed towards the brunette. He replied that he was neither one nor the other. Approaching the girl, the blonde bowed gallantly and asked permission to introduce himself. His name was Shapiro, and he was a faithful servant of the great Beldemer. The young man took the bundle of things from the girl, gallantly offered her to go through, since his master was already waiting for Lady Renya. The brunette put on the suit that the young lady had brought. The handsome man thought that it suited him perfectly. Renya was pleased that all the clothes she had brought suited the brunette. Shapiro complimented Lady Renya. He said that she had a keen eye. Beldemer asked Renya why the brunette was looking at his body like that. Did she really do it to guess his size? The servant doubted it. He expressed the opinion that most likely, Renya did not take her eyes off because she desired the young man. Such a statement outraged the brunette. The girl was a little embarrassed but objected. She stated that the blonde's words did not correspond to reality. The brunette watched as Beldemer's servant touched him all the time. She asked if the brunette hadn't said that he didn't like it when other people touched him. She thoughtfully concluded that perhaps it was because the blonde man was a man. The hand of Beldemer's servant froze in midair. Shapiro turned his attention to the girl. He smiled a crooked smile. He noticed that, as he had told her earlier, he was not human. The unusual servant repeated that he was not a man. The blonde explained that he could not be called either a woman or a man. And he wasn't a ghost either. Renya decided to find out who the blonde man really was. Shapiro closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He admitted that there had been quite a few mortals in his past, like Lady Renya. The blonde enthusiastically recounted that his master had inspired such admiration that huge mountains of love letters had grown up in his honor. Beldemer stood over a huge pile of various correspondence. He grabbed his head. He did not understand what he had to do with these letters. The blonde reported that when important letters were lost in a pile of all this waste paper, his master decided to create a familiar for himself. I hoped the brunette knew what a familiar was. The girl knew. It was a supernatural creature that served as an assistant to a wizard or a witch. Shapiro noted that there was no need for clarification then, and knowing how infinitely talented his master was. The servant paused for a long time. The blonde was not at all surprised that he had created a truly flawless familiar. Shapiro wiped away a tear of affection. His master asked him to stop. Thus, the blonde was accidentally created by his master as a practically ideal being. The brunette concluded, both master and servant. The blonde was effusive in his gratitude. He continued to praise his master. Renya asked Beldemer if this meant that the man was a mage. The brunette confirmed that he was a mage. The button on his vest was holding on with all its might. The girl wondered what kind of mage he was with such a muscular body. The loyal servant obsequiously announced that Lady Renya had married the greatest of them all. The brunette turned sharply towards the two men. The blonde admitted that he thought of the girl as special. But now, at least it seemed that the lady was not trying to deceive his master. Renya stared at the speaker in surprise. She asked what Shapiro meant. The blonde looked down. At first he thought that the reason why his master didn't use magic was because of the girl. But seeing that the brunette mistook the spell below for a ghost, he was sure that the lady was not capable of such a trick. Renya did not understand what was being discussed. She jumped up abruptly and approached the two men. The girl even scared them a little. She asked if the brunette could not use magic. Beldemer turned away and sadly admitted that, to his great regret, this was indeed the case. The girl beamed. This meant that the brunette would not be able to harm her with his magic if he found out that the girl was already married. Suddenly, Renya broke out in a cold sweat. She stopped. She asked about that thing downstairs. She asked if that strange thing wasn't a ghost. All three of them settled down in a cozy, spacious office with bookshelves. The girl was worried. She wondered if it was just magic. The brunette was delighted by the news. It turned out that here, in the basement, there really was an alchemist's workshop. The brunette admitted that when he tried to find the source of the sounds, he discovered that someone had cast a spell on the estate. The magic circles drawn with mana stones throughout the building, as well as the alchemy table in the basement, were invisible due to magical seals. Renya clenched her fists. The girl was already impatient to find out what kind of bastard had been living here all this time and not paying rent. A teapot floated up to the brunette and filled his cup. Beldemer noticed that the servant's magic worked perfectly. But he was gone. Maybe it was the curse. Shapiro confessed to the gentleman that he had one theory. The brunette was genuinely interested. He listened attentively to the servant. The blonde man revealed that it was possible that this was because Lady Renya's wish had not yet been fully fulfilled. Usually once the wish was considered fulfilled, its master would turn back into a statue. But this time it hadn't happened yet. Beldemer agreed. The blonde's words made sense. The brunette rolled up his shirt sleeve and a glowing symbol appeared on his wrist. The young man decided to find out how many wishes he had fulfilled before Renya. The blonde saw the number 50 and told his master about it. Beldemer thought that his servant was probably right. The handsome man froze in thought. He was immersed in heavy thoughts. He agreed that Renya's wish had not yet been fulfilled. The brunette was puzzled as to why he was now in human form. The servant suggested that Renya's wish must be in the process of being fulfilled. Beldemer thought again. It seemed that the blonde's assumption also made sense. The young man remembered how the brunette screamed that she wanted him to be her husband. He thought that after all, Renya's desire was too abstract. The brunette sighed heavily. Shapiro poured himself a cup of tea. He asked what it meant to be a husband. The servant took a sip of the hot drink. He noted that from the woman's point of view, this is the man she married. Suddenly, a brilliant thought struck the blonde. It could be because they weren't officially married. The brunette raised his eyebrows in surprise. He decided to clarify what he meant by officially. Shapiro put his cup on the table. He decided to explain. They just announced that they would be married. Therefore, the gentleman cannot be called her legal husband now. The blonde was sure that the wish had not been fulfilled. His ceremony with Mrs. Renya had not yet taken place, and they had not made their vows. Beldemer's eyes widened in surprise. He admitted that he had always thought so. Of all his familiars, the blonde one was the closest to perfection. He patted the servant on the head with delight. Renya was a little constrained and scared. She asked the brunette if he really wanted to arrange a wedding. Beldemer tensed up. He looked intently at his interlocutor. He asked why she seemed dissatisfied to him. Even when the brunette said that he would like to officially become her husband, he noticed that the girl did not look happy. The brunette thought about what to answer. Suddenly the girl looked up at the two young men and laughed. She admitted that it happened because it all happened so suddenly. Shapiro asked permission to schedule the ceremony for tomorrow. The brunette did not agree. Blood flowed from the servant's tender ears from her scream. Beldemer tensed up and looked at the girl intently. He asked why the girl refused. The brunette tried to come up with a reason, and then the perfect idea came to her mind. As a bride, she must wear a wedding dress that would be hard to come by if they were to have a ceremony. The young woman explained that she could not appear before Beldemer at their wedding in these rags. She wanted to have a banquet, and to choose a place for the ceremony. Renya wanted to hold the wedding in a very quiet place, for example, on an uninhabited beach. And she needs flower arrangements, and also invite witnesses and find a priest who can tie them in marriage. The brunette chuckled knowingly. Beldemer thought about it. He decided that it would be better if he tried to understand what the person who made the wish wanted. The time spent outside of this statue turned out not to be so bad. The young man agreed to do as Renya wanted. The young lady talked about how organizing a wedding is a very difficult task. The girl sincerely thanked her newly made groom. Her face turned pink with pleasure. Renya decided that she would definitely have a wonderful wedding. She thought that she was simply doomed to marry a second time. Meanwhile, the lady's maid found the place where Miss Freya lived. A wooden house was located in a circle of large fir trees. The girl hid behind the tree trunks. She looked around the area with surprise and caution. The lady asked to find Freya. The rival lived with her relatives 3 months ago. Why shouldn't the maid check? Was she with them now? The maid sometimes did not understand her mistress. Wasn't it good that Freya had disappeared? The girl knocked on the door, asked if anyone was home. Suddenly, she heard a voice and turned around. Behind her stood an old man with a cane. He told the girl that no one lived in this house. There used to be a lonely old man living there. He died a year ago. Annie heard that a whole family lived there. Maybe someone moved in. She asked when the old man died. Grandfather thought about it. He tried to remember if there was anything similar. He said that he didn't remember anything like that. He said that after the death of that old man, this house stood empty. Annie was surprised and confused. The girl did not understand how this could happen. The last rays of sunlight glided across the brickwork of the majestic mansion. Words of apology were heard in one of the rooms of the estate. Freya stood before her masters with tears in her eyes. The maid asked for forgiveness for the inconvenience she had caused by her sudden disappearance. Renya sipped her tea and watched her rival thoughtfully. The young woman wondered if she should do anything. Edwin was irritated. He stopped Freya abruptly, said she could go. But the lord's wife interrupted him, asked him to wait. Both the red-haired maid and Lord Lepore were surprised by the girl's behavior. The young lady reassured Freya, said that everything was fine. She carefully placed the cup with unfinished tea on the saucer. She admitted that she was glad to see the maid back. Renya looked at the young men intently and announced that she had something to say to both of them. The blonde asked if his wife really wanted a divorce from him. Renya confirmed that her husband's words were right. The blonde grabbed his head in a desperate gesture and closed his eyes. He admitted that this was quite unexpected for him. Lady Lepore noted that now her husband could be with whomever he wanted. The blonde made excuses. As he had said before, there was nothing between him and the maid. The brunette lowered her gaze. Then she asked her husband to answer whether he loved her. Edwin remained thoughtfully silent. The young man admitted that in any case he did not agree to a divorce. At least not now. Renia tried to control herself. The girl did not understand why and asked the reason for his refusal. The blonde replied that his sister Mary was getting married soon, and he wanted to postpone talk of divorce until her ceremony. Renya stood up abruptly. She knew her husband was refusing to divorce her because he needed money for his sister's wedding. Again, it all came down to money. Renya didn't show it. She said it was very good. The girl understood that she couldn't object to anything for now. Suddenly, Lady Lepore turned to her rival. Freya stared at her mistress, uncomprehending. The maid bowed her head, feigning submission before her mistress. Freya was wary, not knowing what to expect from her rival. The red hair shimmered dully. Renya said that she was too strict with the maid. The red-haired rival froze in surprise. Mistrust was visible in her eyes. Lady Lepore knew it was too late, but she asked to accept her apology. She promised that she would not disturb them both again. The massive library door closed. The maid and the lord remained in the study among the high bookshelves. Lord Lepore frowned. His green eyes were clearly puzzled. Something had not gone according to his plan. Renya leaned her head against the wall panel. She was quietly banging her head against it. She was surprised at herself. Did she really say that? The young woman thought that this most likely happened because she was already dying. Sadness settled in the girl's eyes. The brunette leaned against the wall and quietly muttered that it wasn't as painful as she thought. Her eyes filled with tears. Suddenly, the girl heard a loud scream. Her maid was running towards her. The brunette jerked in fear. Annie let out a worried cry when she saw the lady's tears. Renya said she had something in her eye, but the maid said it didn't matter now. Annie was very excited. She said that her mistress would not believe her, or rather would not believe what she had learned. The brunette allowed the maid to tell. I asked the maid if Freya's story was a lie. The maid confirmed it. That's right. No one lived in the house where she said she grew up. Renya wondered, why did the red-haired maid lie about her past? Was it part of her rival's plan to seduce Edwin? Annie reminded about the stone that the lady stole along with the map, and which allowed her to make a wish. The brunette immediately asked what happened to it. The maid asked a reasonable question, why the red-haired girl hadn't looked for him. Renya tensed up and thought about it. Annie continued to think. Either Freya didn't know it was missing, or she knew who stole it. One of the two. There were no other options. Renya thought hard. The girl remembered that the stone disappeared after she made a wish. The young woman was sure that this meant only one thing. Now Freya did not have the stone. and she would not be able to make her wish. The young lady understood that Freya would definitely look for him. The brunette froze in fear, realizing the inevitability of the search. Suddenly, Renya sighed. She remembered that they had more important things to do. The maid asked what kind of things they had. The brunette laughed awkwardly. She didn't know how to confess to Annie. She had a hard time finding the words. The maid tensed up. She admitted that her mistress had scared her. Renya said that she thought she would soon go to the altar again. The faithful servant froze in fear, as if struck by lightning. Annie asked if the lady was going to walk down the aisle again. Was it going to be a wedding again? Mrs. Lepore nodded in agreement. The maid asked if Lady Lepore really wanted to end up behind bars. Her mistress tapped her finger on her head. The haunted house was drowning in the night darkness. The black holes of the windows merged with the shadows of the branches. The full moon was a full mistress in the starry sky. Renya walked down the path to the house. The girl understood that having two husbands was very difficult. She did not think that she could keep it a secret any longer. The brunette understood that she had to divorce Edwin as soon as possible. The girl did not know how to do it. Suddenly the young woman stopped. A figure dressed in a dark cloak with a hood was climbing over the high fence towards the house. The unexpected guest froze on top of the fence. As expected, he felt a certain force. Renya watched him and thought that it was a thief. The girl bravely called out to the stranger. The girl's voice reached the ears of the man sitting on the fence. The brunette noted that if she were in his place, she would not have stuck her nose in there. The girl peered intently at the stranger's figure. The guy jumped and landed softly on the pavement in front of Renya. The brunette asked why he was trying to get into someone else's house. The stranger took off his hood, laughed, asked why she thought he was climbing and why she cared. The guy asked his interlocutor if this wasn't the place where Beldemer lived. Renya was stunned. She was amazed how he knew about this. Stammering in surprise, the girl asked the stranger a question. She asked how he knew about it, and who he was. The stranger stood before the brunette. His mysterious smile radiated confidence. The silver clasps on his cloak gleamed dimly in the darkness of the night. The mysterious stranger grinned. He asked if the girl really wanted to know who he was. Renya moved closer to her interlocutor. The guy said his name was Chase. She laughed cheerfully and admitted that he was pursuing an ambitious magician. Renya wondered, what did it mean? Ambitious. Suddenly the girl guessed what they were talking about. She asked the stranger if he was a magician. The guy confirmed it. In turn, he asked why the interlocutor was interested in this. The brunette began to warm up her fists, preparing for a fight. The girl wanted to punish the one who summoned the ghost to this estate. She swung and wanted to hit the stranger who had done it. The young man suddenly jumped aside. The girl had almost no doubt that all this disgrace in the estate was caused by her new mysterious acquaintance. The young man sat on the fence. Chase admitted that he did it because he didn't have money for his own lab. The girl understood. Chase said the brunette had no idea how many sleepless nights his father had spent trying to keep the business afloat because of all the rumors. The boy was sure that he would never have encroached on this place if he had known that the estate belonged to the Coriolano Guild. Renya chuckled thoughtfully. She probably should have thanked Chase for letting her hide Beldemer here now. Renya decided to help the young man. In return, she wanted the guy to keep quiet about what was happening here. The brunette resolutely jumped to the ground. The girl admitted that she wanted people to continue to think that a ghost lived in the house. Chase was surprised. Was it possible that the girl wanted to do all this for him? Did the brunette really want to hide the fact that Beldemer lived here? Renya confirmed that this was exactly what she wanted. By the way, the girl decided to find out from her interlocutor what he knew about Beldemer. The young woman was holding a book in her hands. She was trying to read, sitting at a table in the room. Beldemer was lying on the bed next to her. He was also reading a book. The girl looked closely at the handsome man and recalled Chase's story. The young man was sure that the brunette was an outstanding magician. One could say that he founded the modern art of magic again. But one day he simply disappeared, leaving no trace or record of where he could be found. Renya thought that one day the brunette disappeared and turned into a statue that granted wishes. She wondered what the hell had happened to him. The brunette suddenly said that Renya could look at him as much as she wanted. It wouldn't change anything. The girl was surprised what he meant. Beldemer insisted that no matter how much the girl wanted it, she would not be able to share his bed until they became legal spouses. Renya was outraged by the interlocutor's conceit. What the hell was he talking about? The girl put the book down, agreed with him, said that she wanted to ask him something. Renya moved to the brunette's bed. She insisted that he tell her the truth. The young man agreed. The brunette thought that Beldamir could not have been turned into a statue just like that. He must have done something terrible. The girl did not know how to start the conversation. The brunette asked why his interlocutor felt so uncomfortable that she couldn't just ask a question. Renya was embarrassed. She looked at her interlocutor carefully. She tried to think of a question. She suddenly asked why she couldn't touch the brunette's body with her hand. The handsome man froze in surprise. Renya couldn't bring herself to ask the question. If only the guy knew how ashamed she was about it. The brunette sat up in bed. Beldamir sighed. It seemed to him that the brown-haired girl was obsessed with his body. The young lady laughed, noting that it was not quite like that. The brunette touched Renya's face. The girl blushed slightly. The guy wondered if his mere presence was not enough for her. The young man thought about it. Unexpectedly, he agreed. Renya was excited. The guy assured her that as his wife she had the right to know. The brunette sat up in bed. The girl stood in front of him waiting for an answer. Beldamir admitted that the reason the girl couldn't touch him. The brunette interrupted him impatiently. She wanted to find out the truth as quickly as possible. She expected the brunette to reveal the secret. Beldamir did not look at his interlocutor. The young man admitted that the reason was that he did not want it. Renya was shocked by the answer. She looked piercingly at her new-baked groom. The brunette was serious. He admitted that his mood was spoiled when someone touched him. And this prevented him from studying magic. He always avoided things that hindered him from advancing in his research. His confession made Renya sad. The girl said that she understood everything. Suddenly, a brilliant idea struck her. The girl noted that the guy was not currently doing research. The brunette sighed. He was sure that Renya wanted to touch him. He thought how natural it was that she wanted to embrace his body with her arms. The narcissistic magician reasoned that he now understood very well the desires of other people, as well as what lay behind the desire of the brunette to be his wife. The young man slammed shut the book he had been reading recently. He declared that he could not consent to being touched. The guy hoped that something could satisfy Renya. The girl stared at her interlocutor in anticipation. Suddenly, Beldamir began to slowly unbutton his snow-white shirt, revealing his perfect torso. The brunette tried to cover her face with her hands in embarrassment. Blood rushed to her cheeks. The girl shouted Beldamir's name. The young man bared his perfect body, which radiated strength and grace. The brunette graciously allowed the girl to touch him with her gaze. The young people did not notice how the door to the room quietly opened. They were completely absorbed in what was happening. Shapiro smiled radiantly. He was carrying an exquisite dinner to his beloved master. On the tray stood a bottle of wine and a glass. The familiar froze at what he saw. His eyes widened in shock to impossible sizes. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. His jaw dropped in mute amazement. Renya stared at the abs with embarrassment and involuntary admiration. The servant froze in shock in the doorway. Stuttering, he asked what they were doing. Late that evening in Lord Lepore's majestic mansion, the blonde man urged Freya to wait a little longer. The man said that he could not get a divorce yet due to certain circumstances. The young people sat in the library and talked. Freya asked if it was all about Lady Mary's wedding. The man denied her assumptions. He admitted that it was just an excuse he had chosen. The blonde nervously smoothed his hair. He said that there was another reason, but the man couldn't tell the maid about it now. The red-haired homewrecker meekly said that her lord was not obliged to explain everything to her. The girl smiled and said that he was not obliged to divorce either. Lord Lepore considered. Of all the people living here, Freya was the only one with whom he had anything in common. Just as he became part of this family for the money, she came here to pay off her father's debts. The only difference between them was that she had to work hard every day. That's why he wanted to protect her. The man couldn't let her efforts go to waste. He sat closer to the girl and gently took her hands in his. The young people looked at each other. The green-eyed handsome man decided to look for a suitable house for the girl. Since his wife agreed to free Freya from her duties, he suggested that the girl's family move in with her. The redhead smiled. She apologized for interrupting her lord. The girl turned away, hiding her eyes. She decided to stay here. Edwin warned her that her life here would be more difficult. She would have to constantly look back. Freya disagreed. She replied irritably that even if that was the case, she preferred to stay here. The girl confessed to her lord that her only wish was to be here with him. She felt that if she left now, she would never see him again. The blonde looked up at his interlocutor with delight. He whispered his beloved's name. If she really wanted it, then fine. The man agreed to stay here together. He hugged the girl tightly. The redhead felt constrained. She was nervous. The maid's eyes blazed with scarlet fire. The girl understood that this was dangerous. A few days later, the day of another wedding of Rania had arrived. The seashore was ready for the celebration. The night ceremony was expected under the starry sky. The path led to the altar under an airy canopy. The sea splashed nearby, creating a sense of unreality. Annie was worried about the strong wind on the beach. She asked the lady to watch her veil. Dressed in a snow-white wedding dress, the brunette thought that she had always been so unlucky when it came to weddings. The girl shared with her faithful servant that Edwin had frowned so much when she married him, and today the weather was not conducive to a celebration. The bride asked Annie not to call her my lady today. The brunette told everyone that the girl was from the guild. The maid promised to try to remember. Renya looked charming as a bride. Annie noticed her mistress's dress. She asked if this wasn't the dress the girl was wearing during her wedding with Edwin. The young woman hissed at Annie and asked the maid not to even mention such a thing. Quiet steps were heard nearby. Beldemer approached the brunette. He called the girl by name. Renya stared at the newly arrived groom in amazement and admiration. The girl could not take her rapturous gaze off him. The groom was wearing a dazzling white uniform with a gold pattern. The brooch on his tie seemed alive in the flickering light. The brunette asked if she was ready. Behind the newlyweds, Shapiro was not holding back his emotions. He was shouting that his master looked amazing. Annie noticed that the groom looked good. Renya wasn't surprised, looking at the brunette standing next to her. After all, he was such a handsome man that even a loincloth would suit him. The groom looked at Renya. A veil with floral patterns framed her silhouette. Her bare shoulders drew the eye, and a mysterious smile touched her lips. The brunette looked at his wife and thought that she was quite cute. Their glances were interrupted by the priest. The man suggested that they begin the ceremony, allowed the groom and the bride to approach the altar. The couple headed towards the priest. Two guests froze on the sides. Their faces expressed ambiguous feelings. Renya asked the groom if they should hold hands. The brunette glanced at her with displeasure. The girl remembered that Beldemer's mood worsened when someone touched him. The brunette suggested that they simply walk next to each other. Beldemer highly appreciated this wonderful idea. The young people moved slowly along the path. The air around them rang with tension. The wind behind the girl fluttered her weightless veil. The familiar was sobbing. He couldn't even imagine that the master would be engaged to someone like the brunette. Annie asked why the blonde was ruining the party with his tears. Shapiro glared angrily. The servant did not consider this a holiday, unless it was for the bride. The faithful maid was surprised. What was he saying? The young people approached the priest. A man in clerical vestments shouted at the guests who were fighting to stop. He demanded silence. The priest announced that they were gathered there to witness a sacred union and unite these man and woman in the bonds of lawful matrimony. The pastor slowly spoke the necessary words. The bride was nervous. She mentally hurried the minister of the church. She wanted everything to end quickly. Finally, the priest pronounced them husband and wife. He said that the groom could now kiss the bride. Renya's mouth dropped open in surprise. Her second husband stood there with an unyielding expression. He didn't even move. The brunette was nervous. Of course, kiss. He didn't even let Renya take his hand. She hurried the priest, told him to continue. The minister chuckled. He repeated the words about the kiss. Renya said to continue. The man insisted. A kiss is necessary to seal the union. The young woman was confused and embarrassed. What does it mean to fasten? The girl waved her hand, indicating that the priest should continue. The man coughed. He decided that it would be possible to count that the groom kissed the bride. Suddenly, the brunette's scream interrupted the ceremony. Familiar and Annie continued to fight on the seashore. Beldemer said that he was ready to kiss the bride. Renya raised a surprised glance at the brunette. She said that he was not obliged, but the young man insisted. The brunette was very serious. He said that the girl's wish must be fulfilled. He was worried that if this ceremony did not go as it should. The sea breeze played with the hem of the bride's dress. The groom's dress uniform ruffled. The couple stood under a silk canopy at the edge of the sea. Renya was scared. Would he really kiss her even if he didn't like being touched? She was worried that he would die after that. It was very stupid. The brunette turned to the girl and quietly said that he only needed to touch her lips. Beldemer suggested doing it quickly. The young man took the girl by her bare shoulders. He looked intently into her eyes. The man slowly leaned towards his chosen one's face for a kiss. The guests froze to the side. Their faces expressed a mixture of surprise and joy. The familiar was crying, saying it was impossible, asking why the master was doing this. Annie was delighted. She was embarrassed. It was so romantic. Renya froze in anticipation of the kiss. The girl closed her eyes. Her cheeks turned pink. The brunette looked at the girl and leaned closer to her lips. The bouquet slipped from the bride's hands and fell to the ground. Their lips touched. The people around watched the first kiss of the married couple with trepidation. The brunette kissed his new wife and thought that it was all very strange. He did not feel any hostility. Renya was so gentle and so airy. Her chestnut hair flowed softly from under her lace veil. The blush on her cheeks betrayed her excitement. Their kiss deepened and then lingered. The newlyweds enjoyed such an intimate moment as their first kiss. The priest coughed into his fist. The minister thought that the young men certainly did not look like those who were afraid of being touched. Annie was worried about the lady. She turned to the familiar. She asked if he was going to do anything. She noticed that the brunette was behaving like a complete pervert. Shapiro called out to his master. He asked why he was clinging to the girl so tightly. The kiss dragged on. The embrace did not loosen. The cold drops of water disturbed Renia and distracted her from the process. She looked at the sky and noticed that it had started to rain. Her newly made husband didn't like the fact that the brunette was distracted. He made some movement with his fingers and the rain stopped above them. Shapiro was amazed. He looked at his master with all his eyes. He noticed what he had just done. The familiar was delighted. Beldamir had just used magic to create a barrier. The maid was very surprised when she heard about magic. Shapiro was happy that his master's power had returned to him. He shouted that his master had finally regained his magic. The young people continued kissing. The newlyweds could not tear themselves away from each other. Two women in hooded cloaks poured out quite a few gold coins to the priest. They hoped that the pastor would keep the whole incident a secret. The man hid the money in his wallet. He told the woman not to worry. He couldn't do his job if he couldn't keep his mouth shut. The minister also pulled his hood over his head and admitted that he would remain silent. The two women watched him go silently. When the priest left, the women took off their hoods. Annie asked the lady if it was over. Renya hoped so. As the brunette understood, Beldamir was supposed to turn back into a statue as soon as her wish was fulfilled. And so the wedding took place. The girl wondered, did this mean that the brunette would now disappear from her life? Her sad thoughts were interrupted by someone's unfamiliar voice. An unknown man was addressing the lady impolitely. The women were hiding from the rain under an awning. Renya asked the stranger who he was. The man said it didn't matter at all. What was important was that he knew. The stranger smirked. He spoke like a commoner. He didn't even care how much money her family had. What mattered was that she had grabbed 2 husbands. This meant that the girl would have to sit in chains for 10 years, if her husbands found out about each other's existence. Renya asked, how much did he want? The extortionist named the sum of 50 coins. He promised that they would be in the calculation. He asked what she would say about this. Annie dissuaded the lady. Renya interrupted the maid, pulled the hood over her head, offered the extortionist to meet at the docks. At midnight, the blackmailer shouted after the girl that it would be worse for her if she didn't come. He threatened that in that case he would tell her husband everything about her in the pub. The 2 women hidden under their cloaks crept along in uneasy silence. Every step was filled with caution and tension. The maid looked around. Renya turned to the maid with instructions. She ordered the faithful servant to go and collect the gold. The rain was pouring outside the windows. The brunette was sitting on the sofa in the room and thinking about how wet it was. The young man remembered the kiss, revived the sensations, noticed at the same time it was soft. Beldamir was thoughtful. The image of his bride was in his eyes. The brunette thought that she was so beautiful. Romantic thoughts were interrupted by his familiar. The servant entered the room silently. He addressed the master. Shapiro asked if everything was okay with him. The brunette was so deep in his thoughts that he didn't hear what his servant was saying. The familiar admitted that it was very strange. His master was very sad and thoughtful. Agreed with the servant. It was very strange. Beldamir admitted that every time he closed his eyes, he saw the scarlet lips of his new wife. The familiar was surprised. He didn't mean that. The young man looked at his wrist. There was a sign with the number 50 glowing there. He asked the servant why the wish had not yet come true. The number hadn't changed, and the brunette hadn't turned back into a statue yet. The young man stared at his hand. Shapiro reminded him of his master's powers. The brunette was able to use his magic at the ceremony, but now it was gone again. Beldemar chuckled. The familiar admitted that while the master was imprisoned in the statue, he spent all his time studying human literature. Based on his research, Shapiro realized that most of the damned were freed from their curse by receiving true love's kiss. The brunette thought. He looked up at the servant. A perfect thought came into his head. The master and his servant understood each other without words. Shapiro was sure that Lady Renya's kiss was the only way for the master to use his magical powers. The brunette was excited. He thought for a long time and made a decision. The man knocked on the wooden door. When the brunette entered Renya's room, the girl was very surprised. She asked her newlywed husband if he hadn't returned to the temple yet. She asked if he had come to say goodbye. The man shook his head. He told Renya that her wish was probably still unfulfilled. The brunette was shocked. Could it really not be done? She looked at the young man in surprise. Just don't let him tell her that the reason was Edwin. The girl was afraid that Beldemar would turn into a statue again only when she divorced Edwin, and he became her only husband. Wait a second. It wasn't like she could lose them both. Well, the brunette thought she would end up a lonely prisoner in prison. The brunette reported another piece of news. He had lost the ability to use his power again. The girl was surprised to notice that it still worked. There must be some explanation. The brunette thought about it. She suggested that they think about it together. The thought that came to her mind struck Renya. She looked up at the brunette. What did he want to say? The young man supported her unspoken thought. He had come to the same conclusion. Beldemar was sure that his strength had returned because they had kissed. The brunette was crimson. Her eyes were wide open in surprise. The brunette brought his face closer to the girl's embarrassed face. He asked how about testing their theory. Renya was surprised and excited. What did he want to check? She clarified what the brunette meant, that her kiss could restore his strength. Beldemar confirmed. He believed that this was so. The young man looked intently at the brunette. Renya thought that it must have been incredibly hard for a mage like him not to be able to use his power. The brunette agreed with her. The girl decided that she had to help. He had kissed her before and tried to fulfill her wish. It was not worth mentioning that she herself was to blame for the failure. Looking at the brunette, the girl wanted to say that this did not mean that she wanted to kiss the young man again. Renya thought that nothing terrible would happen if they tried. Her newly made husband brought his face closer to hers, gently touched her face. The young woman sat on the couch clenching her fists. The girl was nervous. The brunette brought his face closer to her lips. Both were excited. Suddenly, with a sharp movement, Beldemar hugged the girl and pulled her towards him. The brunette did not take his piercing gaze off Renya. The brunette pressed her palm against her second husband's chest and asked him to stop. The brunette didn't understand what was going on. Renya kept him at a distance. She asked him what he was trying to do. After all, he had to know if the magic worked or not. The young man seemed to have just remembered it. He made a gesture with his hand. He wanted to close the window in the room. Nothing happened. The brunette was confused. He realized that it didn't work. Renya wondered why. After all, they kissed like last time. Suddenly it dawned on the brunette. She wasn't saying this because she had an ulterior motive, but the girl was embarrassed. The interlocutor listened to her attentively. Renya reminded that during the ceremony the brunette used magic not after their kiss, but during the kiss. The young man thought. He asked his interlocutor if they could try again. He approached the girl again. They kissed again. The girl reminded Beldemar that he should try using his magic. Without interrupting the embrace and the kiss itself, the young man snapped his finger. The window, which had been open until now, closed. Renya was right. The brunette realized that they had to do this every time he needed to use magic. Beldemar held the girl's face in his palms. Without taking his eyes off her, he looked into her eyes. Both were flushed after the kiss. The brunette admitted that this time he would try to use higher-order magic. Renya was excited. What higher-order magic were they talking about? Beldemar pointed to the drooping roses in the vase, said that he could make these wilted flowers bloom again. The girl had never seen such magic before. The brunette asked if the girl wanted this. Renya thought about it. She thought that throwing them away would be a waste. Besides, she was intrigued. The young woman said that perhaps they would kiss for the last time. Beldemar hugged the brunette and brought his lips closer to her face. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open. Annie entered, telling the lady about the gold. The faithful servant was confused and amazed by what she saw. Renya jumped up with a cry about the Almighty Lord and pushed the brunette away from her. At midnight, 2 female figures appeared on the docks. Annie noticed that it was so hot in the ladies' room. She asked if her mistress was sure she didn't need ice to cool down a bit. The brunette ordered the maid to stop teasing her. She asked if the maid had prepared what she had asked for. Annie confirmed it. She was holding a bag in her hands. Suddenly, they were called out. The blackmailer approached the 2 women. He asked if they had brought him his gold. Renya said they had. The stranger grinned. He said that she did the right thing. He was sure that for their family it was a drop in the ocean. Renya agreed with the extortionist. The young lady said that it was so. She folded her arms across her chest and said that it was all a loss, so she would prefer not to give him the money. The extortionist shouted at her. He advised her to consider that she had bought herself 2 men with this money. Renya looked down. She admitted that the blackmailer was most likely right. The extortionist then advised her not to dwell on it and reached for the bag with the money. Suddenly, the strong hands of 2 strong men grabbed and held the extortionist from behind, preventing him from taking the money. The bearded man in the hat picked up the bag. He guessed that it contained the entire amount as they had agreed. Renya assured him that she would not disappoint the captain. The extortionist was indignant and was breaking free from the secure hold. He was trying to understand what was happening. They were holding him tightly. Renya replied that she had taken the liberty of finding him a job. As the extortionist might have noticed, merchant ships were always short of sailors. She said that he would have wasted his life if he continued to blackmail people. The extortionist angrily shouted that the girl was just like her daddy. As the blackmailer saw, he taught the girl his tricks. 2 strong sailors pulled the stranger towards the ship. The man resisted, shouted that Renya was a witch, threatened that she would not get away with it. The brunette thought she had become more experienced in such games. Was it because she was married to 2 men? However, Renya was sure that it was no longer so important, because it was not so bad. Meanwhile, in the temple, the emptiness where the statue had been seemed ominous in the semi-darkness of the room. An oppressive silence pressed on the walls. The girl took a cautious step and stopped. She was surprised. She did not understand how this could happen. Freya held an ancient map in her hands. She looked at it carefully and did not understand what it all meant. The redhead looked around. The pedestal was empty. The girl didn't understand why there was nothing there. She was shaking slightly. Freya was amazed. There was no magical statue in the temple. The girl looked at the map again. She knew she was in the right place. A few days ago, she discovered that the map and stone she had obtained with such difficulty had disappeared. Freya looked for them in her bag but did not find them. It didn't take the girl long to figure out that Renya had kidnapped them. She remembered the mistress's apology, the admission that the lady had been too strict with her. And even though it was too late, she asked to accept her apology. Freya saw that the brunette had always been obsessed with Edwin, and when the lady behaved unusually, she got scared. She thought, not this. She immediately realized that it was Renya who stole the stone and the map. The maid was sure of it. She looked everywhere for the lost things, but did not find them. Unexpectedly, in one of the rooms, the loss was found. The stone and the map were lying in the chest of drawers in the mistress's room. Freya grinned triumphantly. She knew. She suspected it had been the brunette all along. But now, in the empty temple, the red-haired homewrecker fell to her knees in despair. The maid screamed indignantly. The fire of hatred blazed brightly in her eyes. She was outraged by Renya's actions. The brunette was still sleeping soundly in her bed when Beldemer entered her room early in the morning. He sat down silently on the edge of her bed. Renya stirred in her sleep. She muttered something quietly. She turned over onto her other side. The brunette looked at the sleeping young woman, tried to use his magic to close the window, snapped his fingers. The window was still open. The brunette was upset. Nothing had happened. As Beldemer had predicted, a kiss was the only way for him to use his magic. The young man looked at the sleeping brunette. He thought. He assumed that he had no other choice. Beldemer was confused by his discovery. It turned out that he had to touch the girl's lips every time he needed. The quiet voice of a young woman interrupted his thoughts. The brunette woke up and looked at Beldemer in surprise. The guy turned away. He asked if Renya was awake. The brunette asked what he was doing here. The girl's voice was hoarse from sleep. Her throat was dry. The narcissistic brunette said that when the girl woke up, she was probably surprised to see such a beautiful face. Renya jumped out of bed demanding water. Suddenly, a glass of water approached the confused girl through the air. Renya froze in bewilderment looking at this magic. Grabbing the glass with both hands, the girl asked how the brunette's magic had returned. The interlocutor thought about it. A minute ago, nothing had worked for him. Renya was delighted. She was glad that, as it seemed to her, they would no longer have to kiss. The brunette found it all strange. Beldemer made several movements with his hands towards the teapot, which stood on the chest of drawers. The kettle did not move. Renya squinted, watching the disobedient dishes. The young people were silent. Beldemer thought about it. He realized that it only worked under certain conditions. But the guy couldn't figure out exactly under what conditions. He remembered that he managed to shield himself from the rain when they kissed at the ceremony. The young magician was also able to bring wilted flowers back to life and bring water to the girl. Renya emptied the entire glass. The brunette was happy. The young man suggested something, asked Renya what spells she would like to see. The brunette was surprised by such a question. She wondered what she would like to see right now. Renya chuckled. She pointed to the empty glass and asked how about putting it back on the table. Beldemer was delighted with this task. He snapped his fingers and the glass, breaking out of the brunette's hands, floated through the air. Renya froze. The girl was afraid to make a sudden movement. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw the empty dishes smoothly fall onto the table. The girl was genuinely happy. She asked the brunette if he had found out under what circumstances his magic worked. The man folded his arms across his chest. He said that if his theory was correct, it meant only one thing. He slowly approached the girl. The brunette gently touched his interlocutor's hair. He admitted that he could only use his magic to fulfill her wishes. At this time in the Coriolano Guild, Lord Edwin's personal servant was asking Freya where she had gone the night before. The girl walked quickly along the castle corridor. Without stopping or even turning her head, she answered that she had gone home. The footman asked why she was so late. The girl got angry. She asked Basil why he was running after her instead of being with his master. The servant called his master young Master Edwin. The girl reminded him that the lord was already married, so for the footman he was Master Edwin. The redhead asked when Basil would finally pull himself together. The footman was embarrassed. He stuttered and asked for forgiveness. Freya ordered the footman to disappear. She informed him that she had to clean Lady Renya's room. The redhead thought for a moment. She smiled sweetly and asked the footman to keep it a secret from Master Edwin that she had gone home again yesterday. Basil was delighted with the girl. His heart was jumping out of his chest. The young man promised to keep everything a secret. The elated footman went away. The red-haired maid was displeased. She thought, what an idiot. Freya slowly opened the door to her mistress's room and looked around. She noticed that the lady had not returned yet. She praised the Lord. The redhead was perplexed. She kept thinking about what could have happened to the statue. The girl opened the chest of drawers. If she took the stone, Renya would suspect her of its disappearance. She decided to leave her a fake. The maid held 2 identical red stones in her hands. Freya wondered whether the lady had made a wish or not yet. And if she had, what she had asked for. The malicious homewrecker didn't think that the lady had asked to stop loving Edwin. The girl grinned. Although it could have happened and she had wished for it. The girl smiled slyly. She thought that in any case it would be better for the lady not to get in her way. Renya ran quickly down the castle corridor. She had to hurry with the divorce. Her faithful maid asked again what the lady meant. The brunette grabbed her head in irritation. She hadn't even imagined that someone would be able to see their wedding on that beach. Not to mention everything else. Renya thought about it. She decided that her wish must come true so that Beldemer could be freed. The faithful maid remarked that even if Master Edwin agreed to the divorce, did the lady really think that her father would give his permission? The 2 women walked down the deserted corridor of the castle. Renya realized the gravity of the situation. She was sure that of course he wouldn't allow it. She asked him to remember how his parent behaved at his and Edwin's wedding. The father then addressed his son-in-law as his dear son. Annie wondered what the lady planned to do next. The brunette decided to make it so that her father would not find out anything. The maid doubted it. She did not believe that such a thing was possible. Renya swore in front of the maid to make all this possible, by any means necessary. The enraged brunette drummed her fingers on the table. She was in the office and talking to her father. She was outraged that her father could allow Edwin to do this. The man looked through the documents. He did not look up at his daughter. Coriolano confessed to his daughter that his son-in-law wanted to learn how to manage the guild. The brunette really hoped that her father had not said yes. But the girl's hopes were not fulfilled. The parent admitted that he allowed Edwin to do this. The girl was in a panic. She did not understand how this was possible. How could father do such a thing? Didn't he find it strange that a man who had never been interested in the guild would ask for such a thing? The man said that perhaps his son-in-law came to this idea when Renya asked him for a divorce. The brunette was embarrassed. She understood what her father was talking about. The man reminded her that he had said time and time again that there were ears here and near the walls. The father put the document aside and admitted that he had also given his son-in-law the key to the vault 3 months ago. Renya was shocked. The brunette thought that only she and her father should have had the key. The girl was furious. She asked why her father gave the key to Edwin without consulting her. Renya tore her hair out in despair. Why did her father do this to her? The man noticed that his daughter could not control her emotions again. The young woman slammed the door as she left the office. She screamed that her father had ruined everything. She asked why he had done this to her. Coriolano was left alone. The man was thinking. He did not understand how his daughter had come to such a conclusion. At this time, Renya was wondering why the hell it was so hard to get a divorce. The brunette was talking to the maid. The girl was curious about what Edwin was planning. Was he planning to destroy the guild? The maid objected cautiously. She suggested that perhaps her husband still had feelings for the lady. Renya was very angry. She noticed that if this was true, then her husband had feelings for the guild's money, and not for her. The brunette clutched her head in despair. She rocked back and forth on the bed. Money was the reason Edwin was putting off the divorce. Suddenly, her gaze fell on a small piece of paper that lay white on the floor near her dresser. The girl tensed. Renya reached out and picked up a piece of paper. Annie asked the lady what it was. The brunette thought about it. She admitted that it was a piece of paper that she had inserted between the shelves, so that if Freya found the stone, she would know about it. The young woman realized that her rival had finally figured out that it was she who had stolen it. Renya opened one of the boxes and looked at its contents. Annie was surprised to see that the stone was still inside. The maid expressed doubt. She asked the lady if the stone had not disappeared after she had made a wish. The young woman picked up the stone. She looked at it and said it was a fake. She ordered a copy and kept it here along with the map. If Freya didn't take it, then she was simply convinced that the brunette had stolen it. The faithful maid was puzzled as to why she had done so. The lady asked Annie when the red-haired rival had come to work for them. The maid was sure that the girl had come about 3 months ago. The young woman speculated that Freya had infiltrated their family, and Edwin had obtained the key to the vault. These events had occurred about 3 months ago. Renya thought for a moment and came to the conclusion that this was definitely not a coincidence. In the haunted house, the brunette looked thoughtfully out the window. The familiar asked the gentleman if he could find out what his master was thinking about. The handsome man did not hide his thoughts. He honestly admitted that he was thinking about Renya's desire. Until it was fulfilled, it turned out that the brunette could only use his powers for her benefit. The blonde considered this rather ridiculous. Shapiro felt it was wrong to be tied to one desire for so long. On the other hand, the familiar reminded the master of his magic. He asked what the master thought the problem was. The blonde recalled that the ceremony had taken place and they had even... Shapiro quickly changed the wording and said that they had demonstrated their consent to their union. In essence, his master and Lady Renya were now husband and wife. The brunette listened attentively to his servant and remained silent. He remembered his promise. He said that in light of how their acquaintance had turned out, he had promised to be a model husband for Renya. There was no way that he, Beldemer, could be anything less than perfect. The young man said he had one thought that he couldn't get out of his head. Shapiro wanted to know what the gentleman had thought. His master admitted that when he heard Renya's wish, he promised that he would be the ideal husband for her. At the same time, in the storage room of the Coriolano Guild, Rania was shocked. On the shelf stood an open carved box. The girl was excited. She grabbed the empty box. Renya didn't know what had been there before. The brunette could safely assume, based on the remaining imprint, that it was a precious stone. I suspected that perhaps this very stone served as payment for the wish in the temple. The girl paced nervously around the office. If her theory was correct, did that mean Freya had stolen the first stone from their vault? It was obvious that the rival had come here to steal the stone. But how did Freya even know about its existence? Renya wondered who could have told the red-haired maid about their family vault. Or that Edwin had a key. An unexpectedly unpleasant thought entered Renya's head. She did not want to believe that her husband and the red-haired homewrecker had been in cahoots from the very beginning. Renya was pacing nervously, wondering if it was possible that Edwin had learned of the stone first and had drawn the maid into his plan. The brunette sighed heavily. The girl's head began to hurt when she thought about it. Her thoughts were interrupted by her faithful maid. Annie informed her lady that a man unknown to her had come to see her. The maid relayed the visitor's words. He said that the girl would definitely understand when she heard that he had come to tell her about his research. The porcelain cup landed on the surface with a soft thud. There was an air of uncertainty. Renya decided to sum up everything she had heard. It turned out that Beldamar used forbidden magic to demonstrate his power. After that, he disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. The brunette asked Chase if that was all he could find out. The guy threw up his hands. He had to work hard to even find that information. Renya was thinking. Looking into space, the girl thought about forbidden magic. She asked her interlocutor what he thought it could be. Chase told her that there was one rule that everyone who studied the magical arts followed. The brunette became curious about what that rule was. Chase told his interlocutor this law. No magician should ever, under any circumstances, try to bring a person back from the dead. Long ago, when the voices of the gods could still be heard, Beldamar tried to push the boundaries of what was possible. The boy thought that if this was the boundary that separated mortals and gods, then whoever managed to cross it could become a god. He was sure of it. The power to overcome the limitations that the gods had placed on people was within him. The young man stood in a relaxed pose, his arms folded across his chest. He looked at one point. The servant asked his master if he was sure that everything would be all right. They both looked at the lifeless body that lay on the bed. The familiar noted that resurrecting the dead was against the will of the gods. Beldamar asked the servant if he hadn't seen how grief was killing the parents of this dead child. Did the familiar really not feel sorry for them at all? Beldamar justified his actions by saying he felt compassion for the boy's parents. The woman sobbed while holding the dead child in her arms. But the reality was this. Beldamar considered himself an outstanding magician who was equal to the gods. A mysterious pentagram was drawn on the floor. Magic filled the air around. Beldamar tried to revive the child. He ordered him to open his eyes. Magic was everywhere, filling every corner of space with its ancient power. The brunette was put on a child who was lying motionless on the bed. He was surprised that it didn't work. Suddenly, the dead man's hands shook. The child moved. Beldamar stared at the boy with all his eyes. He couldn't believe that everything had worked out. The wizard stuttered and asked the child if he had heard his voice. The brunette decided to carefully touch the boy's feet. The dead man replied that he had heard the magician. Beldamar was shocked by what had happened. He recoiled from the bed. There was fear in his eyes. It was no longer a boy sitting on the bed. Someone had entered the dead body. The one who was in the body said that he saw how Beldamar dared to break the ban. The brunette immediately realized that something was wrong. That voice. It couldn't belong to a child. Beldamar tried to object, said that it was definitely a success. God in the boy's body agreed, admitted that it was possible to say so. The brunette laughed. He looked at his hands. He was amazed that he could do it. The highest in the boy's body asked why the brunette dared to challenge him. Beldamar said that he did it out of pity for the child's parents. He admitted that they said their only wish was to get their son back, and the brunette couldn't refuse. The spirit in the boy's body was surprised. Could it really be true? He had no idea that Beldamar liked to fulfill the wishes of others. God thought about it and decided that it wouldn't be too much trouble for the brunette to fulfill a couple more wishes. He made some movement with his fingers and Beldamar turned into a magical statue. He ordered to try. The brunette sat thoughtfully with a book in his hand. Shapiro brought another stack of books. He said that these were all the volumes that the gentleman had requested. The brunette grinned sadly. He looked at the quantity. He noticed that there were quite a lot of them. Shapiro watched his master attentively. He thought that his master must read all these books. The servant noticed what book his master was holding in his hands. On the cover it said, "How to Become a Great Husband." The author of the book admitted that he saved his marriage with the help of advice from this book. Anyone could do that. The brunette sobbed. How sad it was. Beldamar was just trying to keep his promise. Besides, he had no idea how to be a good husband. All the selected books were on the same topic. Happy Wife, Happy Destiny, Marriage for Dummies, To Love and Be Loved, The Ideal Husband. The brunette read out another piece of advice from the book. It advised showing respect to your wife. The brunette agreed that you couldn't argue with that. The next phrase was about not having to communicate with other women. The young man thought about it. Wasn't that obvious? Suddenly he exclaimed joyfully. He saw points that were very important. The author of the book presented many indisputable arguments. The young man sat at the table with a pen in his hands and took notes. Respect your spouse. Always be discreet. Learn to cook well. Be gentle with your spouse. Do not communicate. Wake your wife up with a light kiss every morning. The pen flew across the paper. The brunette underlined the advice about waking up with a light kiss. He put a tick opposite. Mentally wished Renya to just wait. Renya felt an incomprehensible excitement. Her ears were burning. The girl was thinking, was someone really remembering her with an unkind word? The town square was crowded. The girl peered into the crowd. She wondered what all these people were doing here at such an hour. As Renya made her way through the crowd, she heard gossip and surprised exclamations. Everyone was wondering who could have left this thing there. People speculated that perhaps it was the work of an unknown sculptor who was hungry for fame. Renya made her way through the crowd of onlookers with great difficulty. The girl looked up, and what she saw made her freeze in place. The brunette was stunned. She opened her mouth in surprise. The girl did not understand what was happening. A pedestal towered in front of her. On a pedestal in the middle of a busy street stood a sculpture of a half-naked young man. Renya wondered why the statue was there.